I'm trying to be a bit more careful. Lots of us are, and that's because thousands of households have just days left to claim up to £600 of free cash towards those energy bills that just keep on getting higher.
Yeah, so it's much needed money, much needed for a lot of people, and the payment is part of the winter fuel allowance given to pensioners to help them with higher costs during the colder months.
Well, the payment is usually made automatically, but there could still be thousands of people who haven't received their money yet and may need to apply instead.
Well, let's talk to Energy Policy and Technology Senior Research Fellow and friend of the programme, Malcolm Grimston. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Look, with this, it seems like it's those people who are most in need who are least likely to have been given this automatically.
Well, you should bear in mind, it's gone to around 11.5 million people, and there's a few thousand who it hasn't gone to automatically, so we should keep it in perspective.
Yeah.
It's basically the people who aren't on a state pension for some reason, but have reached pensionable age, or who have deferred their state pension and who haven't had the payment before. So if you had it last year, you had no problem, but if you're in those groups, you then had to specifically apply. So a relatively small number of people, but obviously important to those people.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it's not surprising in a way that some people have missed out because this is pretty complicated, isn't it?
Right, so we've got the winter fuel allowance, which goes to pensioners. We've got the cold weather payment. Now, that is triggered if the temperature drops below a certain amount. It's £25 a week to people on certain benefits, but you can't get that in Scotland, which has a different scheme. There's the warm homes discount. Now, that's £150. Doesn't depend on the weather conditions, but does depend on whether you're on benefits or not, whereas the winter fuel payment doesn't depend on that. All that's on top of the £400 we all got through our bills over the course of the last few months, and of course the energy price guarantee that sits over the top of all of this. So I think the word complicated is terribly well chosen.
Right, so how do people go about finding out if they are eligible and if they can get their hands on the cash?
Well, most of it does come automatically through. So, for example, the warm homes discount, the £150, goes straight to the electricity company, and you don't have to bother with it. You'll just find that your bill is lower when it comes through the the door or whatever.
It's worth pointing out with that is it does actually show on the bill, doesn't it? It's like the money we've all had off every month, so it does show on the bill, which actually is quite useful to prove you've had it.
That's right, yes. And I think beyond that, the government website actually is rather good at explaining the schemes. So anybody who, it's particularly, rightly so, is targeted for those who are in the most need. Most of these payments, the £400 we all got wasn't, which I think was I was in the crazy position. I was still on my 2-year deal, so I was still paying what I was before, but I was getting this £400 discount. So I was actually paying less for my electricity than I was before the crisis. So I don't think that will be repeated. But the government website, for those who have access to that, to the internet, is a good source. Otherwise, your electricity company will be able to give you information as to whether you might be eligible for any of these. But usually, as I say, you don't need to apply. It's only in certain quite rare situations where you would.
We are told that a lot of the prices are starting to come down now. What's the word I'm looking for? Wholesale. That's the word. Thank you, darling. The wholesale prices are coming down. But there's still this fundamental problem, isn't there, in the energy sector, that the way gas prices and electricity prices are linked. We need to break that, don't we?
It's difficult. I mean, I would say the suppliers of electricity aren't actually making much money out of this. In fact, we've seen 30 of them actually gone bust through this. It's the upstream people with that. And the way the market works is when wind is blowing and the sun's out, that's great, but a lot of times it isn't. And gas is what we call the swing fuel. That's the one that takes up the effort when the others aren't available. And because of that, the way it works, the way electricity charging on a short-term basis works is that the central body, basically the national grid, works out how much power is needed, sees what bids have come up, chooses all the bids that are needed, and the last one that came in terms of price, so the highest price, is what the whole market gets. Now, without that, you could do it, but it would be very, very difficult for companies then to think about investing in new electricity when we need it, because they might find themselves hardly gaining any money at all on those days when the wind was blowing, and that would be very difficult to plan for. Now, we've already got quite a crisis in investment in new power capacity. We've got a lot of our old plants, pretty much all our coal plants have come off to nuclear nuclear stations have come off in the last 6 months. We desperately need to be investing in new capacity. And if you didn't fund it this way, you'd have to find a different way of funding it. But either way, we would still end up paying for it.
Right, yeah, it's one of those.
There's nobody else to pay for. We haven't invested for a long time in power. We need to, because electricity is so vital for us. And one way or another, we are the only people who can pay for it. We're the ones who are there.
What energy should we be investing in, do you think, Malcolm?
So it's encouraging that nuclear is getting a lot of attraction, because that has the advantage of being both low carbon and reliable. We will see offshore wind continuing. Offshore wind is better than onshore wind in the sense that the wind is more reliable, but more difficult in terms you need an awful lot of new power lines to bring it onshore. And actually, in a lot of countries, it's the power lines that are slowing down renewables rather than the actual wind generators or the solar panels. Inevitably, we're going to continue to be burning gas for a long time, and we need to, I think, have a mature discussion over the extent to which we use our own reserves or continue being dependent on imports, because since the Ukraine invasion, we've seen just how vulnerable we are if we become over-dependent. Europe as a whole becomes over-dependent on imports. So gas is certainly going to be a major player for the foreseeable future. We've a lot of gas-powered capacity, but it's beginning to look a bit old. They reckon that would have about a 20-year lifetime, and most of these were built around the sort of turn of the millennium. So at some point we're going to have to look at replacing some of that gas capacity. But it's getting the mix right between being low carbon, being affordable, and being secure. And that's not an easy business. It's what makes energy such a fascinating field.
Well, we'll be talking about it, what you say, for a very long time still to come. Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. And if you do need to get online, get some help, talk to your energy company. If you are one of those people who you think should be eligible for this money and you haven't had it automatically, it's worth checking.
It's free money, isn't it, at the end of the day? And if you're entitled to it, get on the phone, get it. Yeah.